Good morning, everyone. There we go. Mark and I have given this presentation countless number of times inside Microsoft. And what we have learned is that no matter how much we say or what we say, that the most important part are the questions you have. So we'll leave plenty of time at the end for you to come to the microphones and ask questions. And then if we don't get to all of them, you can find us during the conference and ask more. In fact, there's only one real content difference between this deck and the kind of thing we show internally, and that's the next slide. We don't show this when we're showing it inside Microsoft. So before we get to the architecture, we thought it was important to set up the three big principles that we started from when we built Teams. And the first one is that it's designed for the cloud. We wanted to be able to take advantage of all of the new Office 365 features as they became available. There's a lot of integrations here, as you'll see. We talk to a bunch of different parts of Microsoft, and we can own that live site for you. We can make sure that all of those dependencies keep working, and that if they don't, we can respond very quickly, even when something fails in a particular tenant. And we can be agile at scale. We can roll out new features. If we have the odd issue that we need to fix immediately, we can get it out to the clients. And we can make changes in the services and keep things rolling. We also wanted to amplify the value of Office 365. So if you're familiar with Teams, you know it's a chat-centric workspace that brings in a lot of the Office 365 capabilities, including Office 365 Groups, SharePoint, Planner, Power BI, Office, Excel, Word, Visual Studio Team System, and even partners who've decided to build apps and bring them into our tabs. We've got bots, so we have all these integrations, all these different pieces, and we want to make sure that we bring them forward and can do it in a way that makes them all better together and allows your team to collaborate with them. Now, any of you who are enterprise architects in the room know that architecture comes from the Latin, and it means lots of rectangles. We are going to show you a lot of rectangles today. Teams is at the hub, especially on the services side, between Office 365 and Skype, and we're built on Azure. And we'll go into each of these boxes in detail as we go on today. But we just wanted to really point out that the services that we own inside Teams, the services that our teams built and operate, are orchestration layer to do things like attach a modern group to a set of chats, to make sure a SharePoint site is provisioned. And we built all of this on Azure, the same scalable Azure infrastructure that any of you can use. And then we have a series of clients, and this makes it very clear, and we'll talk about this as we go forward in terms of architectural choices. Our clients are not just built on top of a Teams API or a Teams layer. In many cases, it was more efficient and more powerful to let the clients talk directly to the other services. And we'll talk about those as we go forward with the architecture. So let's start with those clients. Many of you know, if you've used Teams before, that we have a web client, desktop client for Windows and Mac. Features on them ship simultaneously on the desktop. We also have mobile clients, Windows Phone, iPhone, iPad, and Android. And I'll start with the right-hand side, because that's simpler to explain. Each of our mobile apps is native, built from the ground up, using the libraries necessary to talk to our backends and the other backends. Our desktop architecture is shared with our web architecture. So we start with TypeScript, Node, jQuery, and we build up with the Angular framework, and then standard HTML and CSS. And then on the desktop, we use an Electron shell. And in there, we can add native code for things like single sign-on and the ability to do meetings and calling, screen sharing, those kinds of things. We love this approach, because as developers, it allows us to release the same feature across all three of our primary desktop platforms. It means that the web folks coming on from the web get the same experience they had. If I'm at home and I use the web client, I get basically the same experience I had on my Mac or Windows machine at work. It also means that when we want to add a feature, it's easier for us to roll it out experimentally so that we can try it, our developers can try it, Microsoft can try it, some lead customers can try it, and then we can kind of put it out to the rest of the world. So we love that agility that we have, and we've really built out this architecture with the idea of being able to add features quickly, respond to requirements quickly, and to be able to deliver auto updates so that every time you experience this product on the web or desktop, you should see it the same way across those platforms. We list the browsers we have down there. This is fun to support. From an architectural standpoint, when you have this many browsers, you end up having to do things like balance how much layout you do with CSS versus how much work you do with TypeScript. And we work very closely, particularly with the Edge team, to make sure that we're getting the right performance out of the decisions we make in that client architecture. You also see the desktops we currently support. This is a logical architecture. Any of you who know Office 365 know that this leaves out a lot of pieces. And it only covers conversations, not meetings and calling or some of the other features. But we really wanted to make sure that we that we kind of provide that logical overlay on the rest of the rectangles that we're going to look at today. It starts with you, that blue person in the middle of the screen. You're a member of a modern group that we created as part of provisioning a team. So every team has a modern group. Every team has a SharePoint site. And then each team is a set of channels or topics that you can have discussions in that each have their own mapping into that SharePoint site for file sharing. So that all works seamlessly. Each channel also has a set of tabs. So if I want to have an Excel file or Power BI or Word or Trello hooked up in here, I can do that right from the channel. I can also, since we didn't have enough room for meetings and calling up in here, I can also go to that channel and start a meeting, a meetup with the rest of my team. In each channel, you've seen one of the differentiators in Teams is this built-in reply chain or threaded discussions in our channels. So in each channel, we also have a set of reply chains or threads where we can keep track of those replies separately from the next chain down. Each channel has a set of messages, and those messages can have images. When Mark comes up here, he's going to tell you where every one of those things is stored. That is one of the big questions we get asked. Where do you put my messages? Where do the images go? Where do the files go? But for right now, it's just good to know that that's the logical architecture we work with most of the time. On the other side, as a user, I don't have to stick to just my team, my tribe. I don't have to stay in channels. I can go all the way across the company and have one-on-one chats or group chats with anyone I want to talk to. And even in there, I can share files from my OneDrive Pro. I have a set of messages, and I can send Giphy and images. So that's the logical architecture behind Teams. This is really how we thought about it before we started building the services. These are the services we own. These are the ones that Teams built to be Teams versus the other ones that we take dependencies on. You'll notice that most of these have more of an orchestration component to them. What we're doing in Teams is taking all of the Office 365 capabilities, all of the modern Skype infrastructure, and trying to bring them together in this wonderful chat-centric workspace, the hub. So we have a set of front-end servers that allow us to send out that HTML, JavaScript, TypeScript payload, and enables us to handle configurations. So you're getting the right version of the product with the right features turned on. Then the rest of these services often are referred to as the middle tier. Now, that used to actually be something. We used to have a much larger middle tier that had a lot of these functions in one big service. It turns out that doesn't work very well. It's not scalable. It's not efficient. I can't deploy different instances to handle different parts of the workload separately. It's more complex. One developer's code can get in the way of another developer's feature going out if we break something. So we have introduced a lot of services. We have a lot of microservices in Teams, and each one has a very specific function. It allows us to deploy each piece separately. We deploy sometimes multiple times a week each service. And we're optimized for evolutionary change. So we can go in and say, for guest access, it's going to be mostly an auth feature. So we're going to do most of our work over there. Some of these other boxes, identity, we actually manage an Active Directory sync to make sure that your teams and modern groups and groups all stay in sync for those rosters. And Mark will describe a lot more about how that works. We also handle authentication. So this is the magic where we figure out if you have a license, if Teams is turned on, if you have a right to use Teams, that kind of stuff. And then we go through and handle some of the mapping between the AAD identity and the Skype identity. Then for compliance, which was one of the very important pillars when we shipped Teams, we own two services, one called audit, one called retention. The audit service is actually a place where we can fire events from all over Teams, including the Skype chat service and our other properties, for things like creating a team, adding a member to a team, creating a channel, deleting a channel, all those things that your IT admins want to know about. Ben Canning actually demoed the screens for this in the Office 365 admin portal. So you can actually go see any events that you want to see. That's because we're pumping them into the standard Office 365 infrastructure. Also, shipping soon, I think we said this year, we have a retention service that will allow, so we pump all of your data, or most of your data for chats, into mailboxes, modern group mailboxes and personal mailboxes for things like e-discovery, legal hold, and other compliance purposes. Information protection and exchange also has data retention policies. So if you say, I don't want a chat to live for more than 30 days, we have a service that takes that message back when they've decided it's time to delete it, and we propagate that delete through the rest of the system. So you can see we are that plumbing between Office and chats and meetings and calling. We also handle notifications. There's a fire hose from the chat service that gives us every message. And if we can tell that you've got a message and you haven't been online in the last 60, 90 minutes, then we can send you an email. If you've used Teams, you've probably gotten some of those emails. So that's a service we own. We also have team management, so we can do the admin. We create a team, we create a SharePoint site, we create the group. And for extensibility, we have a set of services to support tabs, graph, bots. And then for config, we do have metadata stored in a lot of different places. We store some in the chat service in Skype. We store some in the groups. But then there's also some stuff that's very specific to Teams, and we have our own metadata store with that information. So there's a lot of things that Teams owns, and this is a bunch of integrations. This is part of the reason why we were so happy to be in the cloud. If you had to build these integrations yourself in your data centers, this would not be fun. For us, it was a lot of fun. So what do those talk to? Well, on the Teams and Skype side, because we're chat-centric, we take a big bet on a lot of the messaging services. And again, that's a set of primarily microservices on the modern Skype side. Chat, media, which is where we store images, search. So I don't know if you've played in Teams, but you probably know that we've got a very powerful search functionality where we take all the messages that come in and make them available for you to go find things so you don't have to bookmark all the messages you want to get back to. We also have the URL preview service. So just like any other modern app, if you put in a URL, we give you back the little chiclet with the preview so that you know, so that you can share a URL and everyone knows what it is they'll be clicking on. The notification hub that lets you know when new messages have arrived in your client. And on the calling and meeting side, we're starting, we've plugged into the calling and meeting pieces. Some of these things were already in common, like the media stack. We're already in common with Skype for Business. Some of these pieces are the more modern Skype converged cloud stack, and we're working to bring those together more and more. But they're all basically internally the same set of teams working together on these pieces. We also count on them for presence. So if you've used Teams, you know the little red, yellow, green presence pill. We get that. And we have configuration experimentation, so we can pick a set of users and say we'd like to try something on them inside Microsoft. I've got some experiments running right now that 6 people are on inside our team because they want to see how some feature is going to work just for them before they try it out with anyone else. And again, that's a nice part of being modern cloud architecture. And then we also have the identity and permission service, which is how we map AAD users into the Skype world. A permission service is a place where, for instance, for guest access, we had to go in and make some changes to say it's OK for someone outside the host tenant to start contacting other people inside that tenant. And on the Office side, we see Office in 2 ways. It's a platform for us, and it's a set of applications that are integrated and surfaced and amplified inside Teams. So our big platform is Exchange. If you've been in Teams, you see we pull your calendar, and you can join Teams meetings or go find a Skype for Business meeting. We use groups. We use SharePoint. We go and create that SharePoint site for you. We can store videos and stream. We use your OneDrive for Business. And we use information protection. And Mark will go into very big detail about exactly the workflow for that information protection. But for us, we didn't want to have to rebuild any of these things that you've already got from Exchange. We did not want to rebuild information protection, e-discovery, legal hold, audit logging, data retention. Those are things that Microsoft already does very well. And as part of becoming compliant, it was easy for us to go take a bet on that platform, and then it's a question of moving the data into the right place and taking the right signals back. And applications, we can provision a OneNote for your team. We have all the Power Apps, the Planner, PowerPoint, Word, and Excel can surface in those tabs that we talked about, and also Power BI. And this is all part of that vision to be that app hub that we talked about yesterday. All right. As I said, we're built on Azure. So what parts of Azure? Almost all of it. If you've built anything on Azure, you recognize that this is a lot of Azure. Excuse me, a lot of Azure. So for instance, we talk to a lot of different parts of Microsoft. We store data in Azure. That's all got to be protected. So we use Key Vault. It's the place where we can store credentials to make sure that we can be compliant, that no one has access to the data behind it. Only the code in production has access to the data that it needs to access. We use Azure Storage. We count on Azure Active Directory. We use caches in a lot of places. As you can imagine, for a cloud app like this, there are many places where we want to have the data much closer to our services, and we'll go get it and keep it there. Azure also allows us to have a global footprint very quickly. So I don't know if you noticed, but Teams came out of Microsoft pretty fast from the time we first started talking about it. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that we could build a set of services, get them out on Azure, get them out in multiple data centers across the world. And we've been running on Teams internally for much longer than even the preview release. And our ability to just get that footprint out in Azure and then start scaling it, pushing it out to more regions was super important to us. And that's why we like being on Azure. This used to be the only slide we showed when we talked about Teams architecture. This used to be it. We had literally just spent an hour going line by line. That tended to confuse people more than help. But it at least does give a little bit more detail into how these different pieces communicate with each other. So we have the team services there in the middle. That's the dozen or so microservices that we call our middle tier. And let's just walk through one of the flows. I want to create a team. So we go to create a team. You get in your desktop client. We call down to Teams service. It goes and gets some information from our backing store. And then it's going to call out, create a modern group. It's going to call it to SharePoint, provision a SharePoint site. It's going to call out to the chat service, start provisioning the right objects we need to handle Teams and channels and chats. And then it's going to come back and say, hey, you've got a team. Same thing happens if I want to add a person. We come down through Teams and we do the orchestration to make sure this all looks seamless. But from a client, if I just want to chat, it's probably not that efficient to go through this intermediate service. It's great for orchestrating admin operations, but it's maybe not so good if I just want to ping a friend. So the clients talk directly to the chat and present services. They have a series of requests that they make to sync the data down, and then some long polls or hanging gets to get new notifications when they come out. They also talk directly to the next generation calling stack. Because again, you don't want Teams microservices in the middle when you're trying to move audio video bits. Now, let's say a user comes in and they do want to do something like most recent files. We might do that through a middle tier service because we want to do some other operations to bring it all in together. We might not make the client go do that on its own. Now there's this weird little part down here in the lower right-hand side with the notification hub, the Firehose listener, the email service. So we actually, in our middle tier, get a fire hose of all of the messages that are going through chat service. And we can do things on them like create your activity bells. So we have a lot of control over how you're notified about when your app mentioned. So when someone says, hey, at you, I want you to see this, or when someone replies to you. And that's also where we can hang out in a delay queue and say 90 minutes later, if you haven't come into Teams, I'm going to send you an email that you missed a message. And while I've been here, I've gotten at least 3 or 4 of those emails a day. So keep this in your mind, because this is the last big architecture diagram. Mark's going to talk a lot more about how the data and processes flow through this and where your data goes. And then when we get back together as a group, hopefully you have a lot of questions. Mark?
All right. Great. Thank you, Dan. So Teams is available in 181 countries, 25 languages. And how we achieve this is we're deployed around the world in Azure data centers across 3 regions, specifically the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. Customer data at rest does reside in region based on your tenant affinity. So hypothetical, if you're an organization that signs an Office 365 subscription in, say, France, your data will reside in region, in EMEA, in European Union data centers, and adhere to European Union laws. For files, we'll go a step further. If the tenant's in Australia, Canada, India, Japan, United Kingdom, or United States, the files are actually stored in country. And we continue to invest in our global footprint, specifically around data residency. So in the 4th quarter of this year, we will store chat data in country in the United Kingdom, and then, it's loud, in the 1st quarter of next year, we'll store chat data in country in India, and then throughout the year, we're going to continue to invest in data residency in the different in-country locations that Office 365 is available today. I also want to call out, we are working to make Microsoft Teams available in the US Gov data centers as well over the course of 2018, and also be a part of the G SKUs. So that's underway, and then a part of that we go through the FedRAMP audit, et cetera. So as many may be IT pros in the audience, as Dan called out, Microsoft Teams is backed by groups. And so we use the AD groups as well. So you can go and add a member or remove a member to a team directly in Teams in the Teams UI. You can also add or remove a member directly in Azure Active Directory, and we will sync that to Teams. Now the sync typically takes about 15 minutes on average, what I've seen. The SLA is 24 hours, but this really helps administrators from a manageability and all the tooling that AD brings to bear. I was actually talking to someone at the exhibit yesterday, and they, for whatever reason, had a number of people in their organization that they needed to block the creation of teams, and they did that by going in AD and blocking the creation of groups for those individuals, just as an example of something that you could do. There's a number of events that we sync today, and we're investing in more events and evolving that over time as well. So yeah, as Dan mentioned, yeah, we're often asked where my chat message is actually stored. So there's a chat service behind Teams, and it has its own physical storage. But you could imagine when you send a chat to someone from the sender to receiver, you expect it to get there instantly. So most processing actually happens in memory, and then that's backed by Azure Storage. We also publish the chat information down to Exchange to enable information protection, and then images are stored in a separate physical media store that's specifically designed for images. Early on development of Microsoft Teams, when we started thinking about files, you know how important it was to associate files with conversations. We made a conscious choice to build this on top of SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. And it just has huge benefits for us in terms of scale, manageability, and all the compliance capabilities they've invested in over many, many years. So I personally think it was a really good decision. So basically what happens is if you have a chat with someone and you associate a file, that file is uploaded to OneDrive for Business, and then the permissions on that file are shared with all the participants of the conversation that you're having with. So it's very secure. All the sort of legwork of trying to do that manually is taken care of for you. You don't have to, it's very simple. You just upload the file and we take care of that. And then if you have a conversation in a team and you upload a file, that file is uploaded into a SharePoint folder that's associated with the channel. And again, permissions are all set for you based on the members of that team that you're in. So again, it's very simple. And actually, I love that feature because it's so easy for me to find the files that I care about. There's no longer do you have to have V1, V2, V3 of the file, and they're passed around to various locations, and it just makes it really easy. Earlier this year, we added additional cloud storage integrations, specifically Dropbox, Box, ShareFile, and Google Drive for accessing files if you happen to use those. Of course, as an administrator, you have the ability to enable or disable that integration. So earlier I mentioned that conversations are published out to Exchange. I just want to drill into this a little bit deeper. I do want to make a comment that Ansuman is here and myself are doing a separate session tomorrow specifically on security and compliance. So we'll be doing some demos and going deeper onto this area, but I just want to touch on it here from how things kind of work. So basically, if you have a chat in Teams, that chat goes down to the chat service. We have a service internally we refer to as the substrate, and that looks at the chat and decides what to do with it. If it's an individual chat, it's actually published into a hidden folder in each participant in the conversation's mailbox. And then if you happen to be on premises with Exchange, we actually publish that same information out into cloud storage for each individual user. Then if you're in a team conversation, that team conversation again goes to the chat service down to the substrate and says, okay, this team conversation, and that will be published into a hidden folder in the group mailbox associated with that team. And so, and then files, as I mentioned earlier, in SharePoint and OneDrive for Business, and then OneNote is actually physically stored in the SharePoint as well. So then in doing that, all the e-discovery tools and the information protection that you have that you might be using with Exchange today become available to you as well. So e-discovery works the same way, just like you're doing e-discovery on email, you're able to now do e-discovery against Teams as well, or legal hold. When you put someone's mailbox on hold, it applies now to email, and it'll also apply to Microsoft Teams. And compliance, content search, archive work in the same way. Retention, as Dan mentioned, and we're showing some screenshots of this tomorrow, but effectively this is where some companies view the data as a liability. They want to get rid of it as soon as they deem it no longer useful. And you might have, say, your chats, and you want to have, let's say, all my chats just deleted after, say, 30 days, and my team conversations after, say, 2 years, because they might go on longer for longer projects, that you'd be able to set policies for your own tenant. Again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on that tomorrow. And that's a capability that's slated for the fourth quarter of this calendar year. Looking forward. Audit logs, also basically, as Dan mentioned, all the different events within Teams. Funny story, early on, true story, and we're building Microsoft Teams. We're using Teams to actually, as our product group, to define all the capabilities we're doing in all our communications. And one day, all of a sudden, that team was gone and just disappeared. And basically, a developer had written a test script that went wrong and accidentally deleted the team. And then we were able to look in the logs, see who it was. He was embarrassed, and we were able to recover the team, thankfully. But yeah, audit logs is something, again, for particularly IT pros, something you want to pay attention to. I think there's quite a few events. We just added more recently, and we keep investing there as well. So guest access, really excited to get this out in the market. It was actually a huge effort for us, and great to start getting feedback from folks on this. The key thing from an architectural standpoint I want to call out is guest access is built using Azure Active Directory's B2B platform. And so what this means is, again, you can go into Teams, certainly add guests to your Teams, et cetera. You can also manage your guests directly in Azure Active Directory. Or if for whatever reason you need to revoke access, you can also do that directly in one place, and that applies to all workloads. So the host tenant who invites a guest, there's an AD token created in that host tenant, and you have full control over that. And that's what's used by not just Teams, but all the other workloads, like things like SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, et cetera. So again, just from a manageability standpoint, it makes it very easy to, in one place, manage what guest you want to be in your organization, what guests you do not. Again, and Azure Active Directory provides a lot of manageability and tooling that's going to help you with that. So recognizing that different organizations are at different stages in moving to the cloud, I do want to call out a few points here. So there's some folks who are on Exchange Online today, some who have Exchange Online dedicated vNext. There's also something called Exchange Online Dedicated Legacy. And then, of course, there's folks who have Exchange on premises. The key things here, just to note, is meetings and Exchange connectors are impacted. If you're running Exchange Online Dedicated Legacy or running Exchange on premises, then those capabilities will not function for you within Microsoft Teams. And then the e-discovery portion, as I mentioned today, does require Exchange Online for those to work, so it's important to note. We are working with the information protection team to see if we can add e-discovery support against that cloud storage that I mentioned, and we're hoping to see if we can do something around that next year, but I don't have any dates I can share with you at this time. So, kind of wrap up this, here's some helpful links. I do want to kind of call out to the Success with Teams website. That's like probably one of the best places if you're trying to learn about Teams or working through how you're going to deploy across your organization. There's a lot of helpful information, both on just practical things from provisioning as well as some best practices as well. So that's kind of what we wanted to get through today, and we're really hoping we wanted to leave a lot of time at the end for questions, just because we know that everyone has unique scenarios for their own organization. So we'd like to invite people up to the microphones to ask some questions.
There's a microphone right there. And we do ask that you use the microphones because a lot of this is being recorded for posterity or watched by people live right now. So if you go up to the microphone and stand close and ask your question, and we'll kind of just start here and then go that way and come back again. So,
go ahead.
I have two questions, actually. One is about that access rights. You said that you can invite...
Could you talk closer to the microphone? Sorry.
You can invite external users, and it shows that it would give them access to the underlying infrastructure, SharePoint, and all that. How would that work? Because these are, let's say we have an Office 365 subscription, E3 or whatever for the organization. Inviting a guest creates a B2B account that would give them access to all the underlying infrastructure. So that's the first question. The second one was about this last slide here. You are showing the, I forgot that one, never mind. But can you answer the first one?
And this is one of the reasons why guest access was hard and took a while, is that we were really dedicated to doing it with the Azure Active Directory B2B group and the rest of Office. So we were very careful to build it in a way that our guests look like guests for the rest of Office and Azure Active Directory. So we go and they're added as a guest through the B2B process, and then they're a guest and a tenant and have all the capabilities that guests can have for any of the workloads. And that was our goal, is it's not a special Teams guest. Teams supports AAD guests.
So, the other point is about the online versus, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, you want to go back to the?
Can you go back to the slide?
Yep.
Yep. That one there, yeah. No, the next one,
one.
that one, yeah. It shows that if you have on-premise, your meetings and so on are affected. What if you have Skype on-premise?
If you have Skype on premise?
Yeah.
So Teams works, if you have Skype on premises, Teams will still function. It will not, it'll function with no issues, yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I had a couple questions about meeting scheduling in Teams and kind of compared to how Skype for Business works. Like I know in Skype, when you schedule a meeting, it's kind of pinned to a front-end server. That information replicates. There's a bunch of crap with the databases that live on the front-end server. What does that process look like in Teams? Like if I go in and I schedule a meeting, like how does that get created? How does that get persisted? How does it get replicated? And more importantly, is it more performant than in Skype for Business? Because I know Skype really chokes if you try and create, I don't know, if I schedule 1,000 conferences at once, it bogs down. And if I try and cancel them or activate them or deactivate them, that can really slow down. So is Teams more performant there? And I guess how does that work?
I don't think as a scenario that we've invested in the bulk kind of management yet. We've really been focused on schedule a meeting, get it there for the, more the teams having meetings scenario and scheduling a meeting. So I think that's just not a scenario we've aimed at yet. In terms of how we set it up,
As far as schedule a meeting?
It's schedule a meeting.
I have a hard time hearing the question, sorry.
Yeah,
I mean,
the other question.
We're talking directly to Exchange calendaring, so when we schedule a meeting, so we haven't run into any issues from scalability or scheduling too many meetings has not been an issue that we've come across so far.
But specifically, we haven't done anything for the...
Yeah, I guess the specific scenario I'm looking at is, we built contact center on top of Skype for Business, and we're looking kind of at the future as, as these converge. As we go to port that to Teams, we make heavy use of conferencing in Skype.
Okay, that's really good feedback.
So yeah, just to make sure that that works, kind of as you go forward, if you haven't thought of that scenario, that's fine, but as you start thinking about it, just keep in mind the scale that you're looking at is can be very large.
Thank you.
For those of us that weren't at the previous sessions, can you comment on the announcement about Teams replacing Skype for Business and what that roadmap looks like, timing-wise?
Yeah, so I think, what does timing look? So I think at the end of the day, where we see Teams as today, we're moving towards to be a superset of Skype for Business. A lot of the core capabilities are in place right now, but there are some more, I would say, more fringe things that we're still working on. For example, the data residency I mentioned earlier is something that Skype for Business has in place. And so it's, over time, I don't have a specific date in terms of 100% features, because there's another example. I've had a couple customers, most customers love the persistent chat. But we do have a few that say, well, I want to have ephemeral messages where they want the chats to disappear in the much like Skype for Business does today. So there's some things like that we're still working on for a timeline, but it's, so it really kind of depends on the specific capability you're referring to. The key thing we waited for yesterday's announcement was, getting some of the calling in place was sort of the big thing that a lot of people are waiting for. And then there are a few things like that, or even the US government, as I mentioned, where Skype for Business is available in the US government data centers today that we're working on. So I think you're gonna see most of that happening, I guess the tail happening over the course of the next year. But it depends, if you want to talk after about specific capabilities, maybe you could grab me and we could go into that.
So this is just a quick question. You mentioned on one of your slides that with files, they're stored in OneDrive for Business. Who's OneDrive for Business? Are they stored in? Is it sharing a file?
Yeah, so you as an individual who, so there's chats and there's team conversations. So if you have a chat, it is your OneDrive for Business. If you initiate the chat and you add a file, it's stored in your OneDrive for Business, and then your permissions are set to share with the other participants of the conversation. So there's that one copy there. And then in team conversations, it's stored in SharePoint. Okay. Just to be differentiated. Now, the two.
Okay. Very good, thanks.
So, and I was skipping the back, sorry. So let's start down there and do it, right?
Is there currently, or are there plans to enable administrators to programmatically create new teams?
Yes. So I actually, a lot of the functionality we're talking about is stuff that some of my dev teams own, and commandlets, and the ability to come in and do a lot of these things is definitely on the roadmap to come out pretty quickly. So the ability to create teams, add members, configure teams, that kind of stuff.
That'd be great.
Yep.
But you'll see some this calendar year.
Yep.
Coming
Excellent.
out for provisioning of teams.
Thank you.
Hi, our company has made very heavy use of delegation for meeting scheduling over the years, and there have been various Link and Skype updates that have kind of broken that a bit. Is delegation going to work well in this? Because that would be a showstopper for us.
So the short answer is eventually. The longer answer is, we are planning to ship a Skype for Business on-prem server next calendar year, and then that gets supported as long as it gets supported. And we want to make sure that every customer who's currently on Skype for Business continues to be successful. And then it's a process of figuring out when we have the features in Teams that's right for each customer to decide to bring workloads over. So what I would say is, we'll have to get there, but until we're there, hopefully we don't, hopefully you don't get broken again on the Skype for Business side.
Okay, so we don't have a promise of delegation being available right up front for meeting scheduling.
So I think the one way to look at it a little bit is when we look at this story about internally we refer to as convergence from moving from Skype from Business to Teams, we recognize there's lots of scenarios like the example you gave, and things where we see that Skype for Business offers that today. Largely we're trying to get at least at parity to those. It's not that there's not a promise today. I think it's more of just the timing as far as when we can actually provide you a date.
Yeah, it's ordering, not deciding to or not to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Is it in Teams? Is it possible to configure the list of the connector my tenant can use? Because right now, if you go to the connectors, you can see all the connectors.
So you want to see all the connectors that are being used within Teams?
No, I want to control the number of connections available for my tenant.
Okay. You want to see all the connectors?
No, he wants.
Let me rephrase my question.
Limited. Okay.
Yeah, limited set of connections which are approved by our security.
So actually, we're going to talk about this a bit in tomorrow's session, but there is ability to have a loud list of apps that you want to use within Microsoft Teams. And that's a new capability that we're coming out with. And
nice.
I think Ansuman's going to do a bit of a demo of that tomorrow session.
Thank you.
We are well aware that the amount of control we give to IT admins correlates with our success. So.
Yeah, at a high level from a theme, as you can imagine, the software comes out, the first thing is you can turn all integrations on or all of them off, and then quickly you realize at enterprise level that's not good enough, that people need more granular control. And that's just, it's a matter of just evolution for us to enable that. And this particular one, like I said, we'll be able to demo tomorrow. So.
Okay. And then the far back over here, I think.
Hi there. Is there a way for us to consolidate, have a consolidated view if I'm part of multiple teams? Like say, for example, if I'm part of 5 teams, is there a way for me to see all the conversations?
Could you talk closer to the microphone, please?
Is there a way to see a consolidated view of all what's happening if I'm in multiple teams? If I'm part of 5 teams.
Are you looking for like analytics with
No, to catch up on all the conversations that's going on within teams. So should I click on each of the teams to go and see what's happening?
Yeah, so there is a version of the feed that allows you to go see all of the things that you have followed and see all of your activity together.
So in the activity feed in the top
left, if
left,
you play with the
there's
activity drop down in the top left, there are several different views that you can see, and one corresponds to exactly what you're talking about. So.
Okay, thank you.
It's very important to us that you can get into Teams and see what's going on. So that's a view my boss insisted on, so we named it after him internally.
Yeah, so 2 questions from an administrative point of view. One would be, can we now support naming conventions that users can't walk around when creating a team? And from a user perspective, is there going to be ability to browse for existing teams so they don't create duplicates over and over?
So for public teams, you actually can go browse the list of public teams now. There's a gallery that you can go in, and private. So you can go see which teams are available to join, and that's one of the reasons we did it, was to try and keep people from creating teams that didn't need to exist.
In the bottom left, when you hit Add Team, originally it did just show public teams only, and actually a few weeks ago we've added the ability to also search for private teams as well, and then you can request to join a private team, and of course the owner would have to approve that.
Agility.
And the naming convention, since Groups already supports naming convention standards, but when you create a team, which is creating a group, it just walks right over that. And
yeah, so we honor the same naming conventions.
Yeah, that was also pretty recent. Yes, we honor the naming conventions.
Has that been rolled out to all tenants? Because I tried it today and it didn't work.
It's actually that maybe it's pretty new, so it's maybe in the process of rolling out.
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's not out in public yet. Sorry. Yeah. It is coming.
You guys don't get us in trouble now.
Yeah, don't. Yeah.
So with the Teams calendaring features and stuff like that, are there any special considerations for Exchange Web Services that we need to consider, especially if we're in a vNext environment?
So you're saying getting into the Exchange calendaring if you're on-prem?
Well, no. So if we have our Teams environment and we are looking to do the Teams calendaring features, and we are going into a Office 365 vNext environment, is there any special considerations that we need to take into place for Exchange Web Services?
I believe if you're vNext, no.
Yep.
That was the whole green line on the, like,
Okay,
if you're a DVNext.
Yeah, that's correct.
I was kind of
vNext looks to us just like Exchange Online, frankly.
To us, not to everyone else.
All right.
All right.
Hi, with the integration with the storage, such as Box, do you have current capability or plans to allow for replacing the OneDrive storage with allowing all of the stuff that's normally stored on OneDrive to be stored elsewhere?
Yeah, there's no immediate plans for that. It's something we'll look at over time, but right now there's no immediate plans for that.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's your turn now.
All right, thank you. I have a question regarding compliance and Exchange Hybrid. So you talked about how when Exchange is on-prem, the information on the chat is stored in Azure Blobs. What happens when we move the mailbox online? Is that moved over to the mailbox that it's online, or does it stay in Azure Blob? How do you handle that?
I'm not sure if I fully heard the question. If you're on Exchange on premises and we
Right.
write to cloud storage,
Yeah.
and then is the question,
Then we move the mailbox online, right? We migrate
yeah, so the
mailbox
idea
online.
is obviously not to blow away your data, right? So that's, some of this, by the way, is still under development, so but certainly the intent would be obviously not to blow away your data and clobber it from the on-prem that we'd want to merge.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I have two questions actually. The first one is around channels. Is it possible to have, individual permissions for a channel? Unique permissions for a channel?
That is in process. That's one of the big things. That is one of the most common asks, and it's at the top of what my team is doing right now.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, we have been dealing with a lot of tenant mergers recently because of mergers and acquisitions. What do we do as far as teams is concerned when we have to migrate a team from one tenant to another? Is there a clear path for that right now, or is there a best practice around that?
We're in the early stages of talking about how we'll deal with that, but we do not have out-of-the-box, capabilities that we can roll out right now. So we're actually in conversations with both the Exchange and Azure Active Directory about that scenario, but right now it's not supported.
But we know it's a really important scenario, so it's one that
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And just so you know, that other we refer to as private channels, as you'll see. That's the term that we're internally calling that.
All right, working the grid back here, and we'll keep doing the thing.
I have two questions. So first question is, can we define a retention policy for team conversations?
The retention policy?
Yep.
Yep. So we're working on it right now. It's supposed to be out this year, and you'll be able to define the retention policy for chats and for team channel messages.
And it's looking like the fourth quarter of this calendar year.
Yep.
And also for the site provisioning or defining site lifecycle management, that is also coming up for team sites.
I missed that one.
Sorry, I didn't understand. I couldn't hear the question.
Can
you talk closer to the mic?
Yeah. So when we create teams, so it is creating different site collections. So like we need to define site collections, these life cycles. So for that, any plans you have? So site collection life cycle management or provisioning life cycle for teams.
Provisioning the live site for.
Yeah.
Are there any you mean for you to manage the live site for teams, or like to get the telemetry and stuff off of it, or?
Correct.
We do have plans to start making more of that kind of data available. We know what a lot of people love about Skype for Business is there's this incredible set of telemetry on what happened with the call, who's using it, that kind of stuff, and that's definitely something that we know we need to get into Teams.
And we're looking at two levels, both at the tenant level as well as potentially the owner of the team.
Yep.
So.
And we, because of the cloud piece, we are also your first line of live site. Even at the tenant level, we keep track of if anyone's having trouble. This is an interesting thing. We actually do monitoring from the clients. So we keep some amount of telemetry on what scenarios are being successful at the client level so that we can tell if something's going wrong, even if it looks like our services are working well. So you also have us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, when you talk about data being stored in the local country, that's dependent on where they're configured in your tenant, regardless of their actual location?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, it's based on tenant affinity where your Office 365 subscription has been signed.
Yep. We use your home country to pick your region, and then when we get to the Go Locals or the file storage affinity, that's all just the way Office works.
And then just a quick second one, is there any changes that have to come based on the new European Union data privacy laws?
Yeah, so absolutely. We're working hard for particularly the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which has a deadline of May 2018, and Teams is absolutely actively working to support that ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, and I think there are some sessions, one of them may be happening right now, but there are some sessions on Office GDPR in general, and some of those.
Yeah, and I'd go, Microsoft Teams, as well as all of Office 365, absolutely is working towards that, for sure. They're big finds.
Let's start at the way back and come forward.
Yeah, so with regard to the conferencing hardware that is currently encapsulating the Skype room system and the Surface Hub, when can we expect those hardware systems to either talk to Teams or go into a Teams mode? So if I schedule a Teams meeting, we can utilize those conference rooms.
Yep. Over the course of next year, we're going to be investing in that.
And one of the things architecturally about the org is it's the same team that owns the Skype for Business room system stuff, the Skype for Business clients, the Teams, and then another very close team that owns a lot of the other stuff we depend on in Skype. So we're all working together on this. It's not a bunch of competing resources. It's a bunch of people all aligned on the idea that these things are going to work together.
And these will roll in, over the course of the year. We're not able to share specific dates today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question about how authentication works with a desktop client.
Okay.
It seems like, for example, if I'm VPN'd, I authenticate to Teams, and then I break the VPN, I'm still authenticated to the Teams desktop client. Or I take my laptop home from work and I log in the next morning and Teams still works without authenticating me back in. Can you talk about why that happens and talk just a little bit about that architecture of that?
Well, so we're using standard Azure authentication to go get that. You've seen it. You log off and go, and you get sent off to Azure. You auth to AAD if your tenant has any policies like two-factor. Those get applied, and then you're in Teams, and now you have tokens that can be used to renew and to call into the resources. So a lot of that has to do with tenant policies about when tokens have to be renewed.
And by default, I think it's 60 minutes that a token before it refreshes.
Yep. But people can have different settings. I know for a while we were at a day internally.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we could talk after, but a lot of that has to do with how the tenant is set up.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, two quick ones. So what's are you going to raise the limit on the number of people who can be in a team? And also, is there any plans to use document libraries for channels rather than folders?
So the first question, yes. You will see us continue to raise the size of the team. I would expect the next bump to come pretty quickly, maybe sooner than some of the other stuff we've talked about.
Just so everyone knows, the current limit is 999 people in a team is the max limit.
Yep. Sorry, what was the second question?
Second was, can you use a document library rather than a folder for the channel?
So we actually do have the ability to add a document library. So not as the default for the channel, but you can actually go to a tab and add another document library to that tab. And we store that information off, and when anyone else loads a tab, they can get that separate document library. Yeah, so in addition to supporting the standard SharePoint config and all the third-party stuff, you can just go get a separate library and bring it in. So if you have an existing SharePoint site, you can just go add the content.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. All right, and then we'll snake back this way.
So I've got sort of a two-stage question around compliance again and where the chat messages are stored. So you said that chat messages are stored within the mailbox in Exchange Online in a hidden folder, but the UK data center would come in Q4 2017, but there's already Exchange Online mailboxes in
that's fair. Some of them are trying to keep it a little bit simple. Yeah, so there's first of all, the chat data is stored in the chat service, and that today is in region. So for example, if you're out of the UK, that data is physically stored today in Dublin and Amsterdam. Then when we do publish to the mailbox, to your point, because Exchange is already in country, that part of the data is there, but I can't go tell you when I have some data in the country and some there. So we kind of go with
So today, the chat messages aren't yet stored in mailbox?
They're stored in mailboxes, that's correct, but they're also stored in the chat service, which is not available.
Operationally, chat service is an in-memory cache with all the fan out and everything, and then a backing store that's Azure Storage. And that's all, we use the same fundamental architecture as a Skype consumer, except we have our own stamps of it in region that are compliant to the levels that our enterprise customers expect. And then we have a separate pump that pushes the data into the mailboxes for information protection reasons.
So the missing gap in your case is to get that Azure storage in country.
Okay.
And that would complete the story. So then we could look at you and say, all customer data at rest is in country.
And the chat service instance, basically to be inside a Go Local, we have to have a pretty good stamp of all the team stuff plus the chat service stuff right there, because those are the things that have a permanence to them. Something like the meeting relay, the calling relays are parts of the meeting stack where the signal's going everywhere anyway and it's ephemeral. That could be anywhere, but there's a chunk of our stamp that has to live in region before we can be there.
Okay, so the second one is again to do with chat storage and guest access. So if, is the chat message or both sides of the chat stored in the mailbox? So say if I was chatting with you, as a guest.
Yeah. Response and reply. Yeah. If I post something and reply, they're both stored correct.
And is there any storage?
It'd be in your mailbox and my mailbox.
And where's the storage for the guest?
So guest actually, I mentioned earlier about cloud storage because the guest does not have a mailbox.
Yep.
So it's stored in the cloud storage.
Okay, it's in the chat service part.
That's correct. Yeah.
Brilliant.
It's all in it has to be in chat service for the operational, low latency, everything that's going on inside Teams, but then things get pumped over into the right part of Exchange.
Okay.
Either your mailbox, group mailbox, or your cloud storage.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Will it be possible to integrate new teams with existing SharePoint sites? When you create a team, you have a new SharePoint. Some groups already have their existing SharePoint. Can you combine the two, or you have to start or migrate? The second one is group. When you create a team, you create a group. Do you check the distribution lists, the existing distribution lists, so there is no name conflicts? We had this problem before, especially when we are in hybrid environments.
It was a little hard for me to hear, but I think the first question around, can you leverage existing SharePoints? So in Teams today, you can go to the tabs and add a new tab, and you could point that to an existing SharePoint. So that's what we have available right now in production. And then the second question, but we don't have the ability to programmatically convert a bunch of SharePoints to be in the Teams. That's something we have had people ask us for. And then the second question.
About groups. So when you create a team, you have a group. And for the name, do you check distribution list so that the new group doesn't have the same name as an existing distribution list for email?
Do we check to make sure we're not duplicating a name?
Yes. So
yeah.
When we go through a distribution group, if someone's already a member of the team, we don't add them twice.
Yep.
That's what you mean.
We don't let you reuse a name for the modern group.
Yeah, you don't use two names for the same group. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Had a question regarding conferencing hardware. We currently have a solution that supports, it's not a Microsoft solution, it's a third-party solution, but it supports SIP dialing. Will Teams support SIP dialings?
Did you catch? I didn't catch the question. Did you hear it?
No, I was asking, will Teams support SIP dialing?
I think that's a good question for the meeting and calling session.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on, so let's snake back this way.
Hello.
In the back there?
Oh, in the back. Yep, sorry.
Yep.
Okay, I have about 3 questions.
Oh, I don't know if that's fair to everyone else, but okay.
First one, can you clarify, is Team going to replace completely Skype for Business?
So, I mean, the announcement was that we are gradually going to move folks from Skype for Business to Teams as Teams has the functionality that each customer needs.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not, our goal is to support everyone. If you're using Skype for Business right now and you're happy, we want to keep supporting you. And when Teams has all the features you need, then that's when we should start talking about it.
Second question, this is regarding Exchange UM or Exchange UM Online or Azure Voicemail. How it is working with Team?
How we support, sorry?
How you support the voicemail functionality in team?
Oh, yeah, the same mail folder as Skype for Business.
Okay. And what about hybrid environment of Skype for Business specifically?
SBC to Cloud Voice. We have a whisperer up here. You should ask him all your questions. Yeah.
Having a hard time hearing, sorry.
I'll stop by and talk to you.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. What is the roadmap for Skype broadcasting? Would there be a client? Today we use the Skype client for the broadcasting. What is the roadmap out there?
The roadmap for broadcasting?
Yes.
So I think we'll be rolling out more about the specific roadmap and dates for each of these features as we go forward, but I don't think we're going to say anything specific.
Yeah, I don't think we could comment right now.
Yeah. But the meta message is over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to do an awful lot of implementation of the things that are already in Skype for Business, and eventually we'll have what people need to move over.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so I work for a pretty large Fortune 500 that has 27 countries that we do business in and have.
Can you stand closer to the mic, please?
Yeah, sorry. So I work for a pretty big Fortune 500 that has 27 countries that we have offices in that all have different data residency requirements. And our e-discovery and audit legal office has asked us to trust but verify that all of the data residency requirements are being met. So when I have a team that consists of members in 5 or 6 different countries, each with different data residency requirements, how can I verify that those data residency requirements are being met?
So how can you verify the different data residency requirements are being met for different countries? So right now, we match a tenant to a region unless your tenant is in one of the Go locals as we come up. We haven't started rolling out more of a multinational capability to provide different control at different levels. So right now, it's basically you're in the region, or if you're in a Go local, you're in that Go local. But we definitely understand that as Office 365 does more with MNC, we need to come along with them.
And then we were working with our legal department on being able to have a statement of what where things are as well.
Okay, and then second quick question. We have a SharePoint hybrid environment for our online system. And there has been questions about if we wanted to use Teams, how could we ensure that our hybrid farm hosted some of the team sites that got created as a result of creating a new Microsoft team?
Yeah, you can have SharePoint hybrid, but the SharePoint that Microsoft Teams will be using is the SharePoint Online, though.
So there's no way to force any of those SharePoint sites to be on the hybrid side?
not able to point to your on-premises.
Okay, thank you.
SharePoint today.
Thank you. All right, and back over here.
Yep. Good morning. We have a question around trying to understand the life cycle of the team and all its related components. So for instance, when you create a team, it creates an Office 365 group and a SharePoint site. Similar to Yammer, is there any expectation that there's going to be a tighter coupling between those objects? So for instance, in a Yammer group, if you delete the group, it cleans up those other components? Or is it going to stay more of a loose coupling with teams where if you remove the team, the other components stay out there?
Yeah, that's what we talked a little bit about with the AD sync. Absolutely, if you delete a group, with the sync, we'll be then deleting the team, and that's absolutely what we're doing.
Yep. And then the ability to soft delete and recover if someone deleted something they weren't supposed to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, let's take this way, yeah, okay.
So I have 2 questions. The first one is, will I be able to sign into Teams at some point in the future with 2 different login IDs and be able to kind of view and access those Teams within the same interface, or the desktop client, or maybe even mobile?
So the guest access that we built right now is really built for the scenario of one person who's a guest coming into a host. We're definitely looking at in the future moving to the scenario where I'm in multiple tenants and how that works together. We're rolling this out in pieces, and this goes back to the agility. The very first piece of value that we could provide was the guest access, but we'll definitely keep working toward that goal of having, within the limits our tenants are comfortable with, letting that be more live together. There are some tenants who don't want those experiences mixed. They don't want the possibility that you're in 2 different tenants and might be accidentally mixing data. So there's some control that has to be applied there, but it's definitely on the roadmap.
And then as Skype for Business has the federation, again, back to the convergence story, as you can imagine, we're also working towards a similar capability.
Okay, and what about within the same tenant then? Because you did mention multi-tenants, but what about within the same tenant? So say I have 2 login IDs, right, within the same tenant, and I'd like to be able, and of course there are like teams attached to both of those login IDs. I'd like to be able to say sign in with the first ID, I've got all my teams listed over there, and then also sign in into the same desktop app with that second ID and be able to view and manage the other teams associated with the second ID.
That's definitely not a scenario we've prioritized, but we should talk to you about how common that is.
Okay, fair. My second option is, so I have a requirement, it might be a little specific, but audit access or failed access attempts to certain teams. Right now I see that it's not really an option, and the audit options that are currently available are very limited. Is that going to be something that we can see in the future? And also I think when you're talking about private channels, right? So say somebody within the larger team tries to get into that. Can we get an audit report of that?
Audit logs for when we had create private channels or add people to a private channel?
No, specifically somebody else within the team trying to access that private channel, right?
You want logs of people accessing trying to access things they shouldn't?
Yes.
Okay, that's good feedback.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just one question. Backup.
Backup.
So is, before toasting a team, is there a way to back up all of the content just in case you know what people are like? They go, I don't.
So I would say that's part of the broader GDPR effort, like the ability to just go grab any data and pull it down.
So would there be a way to back up a team site?
Yeah, so first of all, so with
Do you mean like for yourself or archive?
There's archive that Exchange provides.
A combination of both, really.
Okay.
There's archive that Exchange provides today for immutability of your data, and so that's available today. And there's also other organizations who want the ability to download the data to their own environment for whatever reason as well, and that's actually a GDPR requirement as well.
Okay, so will there be a way that I can go to one of my team sites and be able to like export
we're saying
conversations, all my drives, data?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we'll necessarily provide that to end users versus to the tenant administrators.
And how that works with this SharePoint and other things is still something we're working out as part of the broader GDPR, but definitely the ability to pull down content.
Okay, thank you.
Dorn's got Dorn up front here. He's working on
it.
Okay, I got a question about how calling works in Teams and sort of the architecture behind that. So keeping in mind that I'm kind of coming from a Skype for Business background here, if I have a one-to-one call, like a one-to-one chat, and I make a call in that, where does the media flow? Is it peer-to-peer or is it via the core?
It's peer-to-peer.
It is peer-to-peer. So if I had a third person.
If it's one-on-one.
If it's one-on-one, it's peer-to-peer. Okay, so if I had a third person.
But it does depend, to be clear. It depends on your environment. If you've got firewalls, there's relays that you can go through. It depends on your situation.
Again, so yeah, similar to the Skype case where I've got like a media relay that might be sitting in the cloud now, not locally. So if I had a third person in that conversation now, does an MCU get invoked?
Yeah, so then it goes through a relay basically in the cloud.
Okay. Now, say I have a conference with 100 participants who are in different regions. Is there a single MCU that has access to every one of those media streams and is mixing that?
I hear the question.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Okay. So there is, I guess you could think of it similar to like in Skype for Business. There is kind of still that idea of a single AV MCU sitting in one of those regions, basically wherever that conference is homed.
Yep. Well, it's whatever. It's the Skype version of those things. Yeah.
So it's the Skype version of those things, but I guess yeah. So because the Skype consumer end is more of a black box right now, so it's really there is a similar idea. There is an entity that has access to that.
Yep.
Okay.
And these are the same teams essentially over there working on these things together. So.
Right, and so as a kind of a real inside baseball aspect of this, dev platform access into that MCU to be able to control media routes.
So these are the kinds of things that have to be on the roadmap in terms of like ethical wall enforcement, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We have hooks for chat. We know where these things can live, like in the permission service for chats. There are similar places where we can hook them in the Skype infrastructure. It's just a matter of getting that on the roadmap. We understand things like ethical walls, DLP, all have to be supported. And there is a place to do it. Right now, it's just not open for third parties.
Right. I guess what I wanted to make sure of is just from kind of a core architecture standpoint that if I have users in multiple regions that are all joining us the same conference, that there is a way to control sort of the mixer for that entire
there is a
conference.
home meeting. There's a home conference owner, and there's one place that we can control that. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
I work at a very large bank, and we have about 300,000 users. We're looking at hybrid. Is there any hope of this solution working with an on-premise hybrid solution at some point in the future next year, or is it going to be purely cloud and only cloud?
The Teams part will be always cloud.
Yeah, that's the
working
piece.
With hybrid.
Skype
yes.
for Business,
Yeah,
we're you know, that's fine for the one-to-one and ad hoc, but obviously the users are demanding that they all can work together. And because we're a very regulated industry, certain data can't go out. Is there anything that you guys are planning that would enable that scenario in an on-premise hybrid scenario with the cloud, where everyone could work together in teams, regardless of whether they're on-premise or in the cloud?
So we will have support for people who are in a hybrid mode, but the Teams part, like the chats, will be hosted in the cloud.
So there's no plans at all for any on-premise solution for that workload for?
Not for that.
Not for Microsoft Teams specifically.
Yeah,
Okay.
for voice, yes, but not for the chat piece.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. We've got a very document-centric collaborating that we use SharePoint Online for. A lot of our users leverage metadata, workflows, and then also custom permission levels, like contribute, no delete. I can see that with the guest access. How is that going to be an option in the future? Because right now, we're not sure how to implement that unless we go into the SharePoint side of Teams and try to actually initiate that, but that seems to break things.
Yeah, we try very hard not to provide too many layers between us and the underlying functionality of something like SharePoint. We try to be the orchestration to pull all this stuff together. So we would say for things like that, we probably will not be surfacing another interface or way to do the same things that you can do in SharePoint or Groups or Exchange. We really just want to surface them all together and make them sort of coherent in a team story.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, if my users are doing this and they need to go through SharePoint to do that, would you recommend them just going for a pure SharePoint Online experience if this is a requirement?
Well, is it a requirement that it's the pure SharePoint Online experience?
No, that they've got required mandatory metadata fields, workflows, custom permission levels. Right now, I don't know about a way to be able to create another.
So we're not going to change anything. The only thing we do is provision the SharePoint site, keep it associated with the channels, and make sure that the permissions at those levels stay together. Everything else is whatever you want to do with it.
Okay, so what would your recommendation be if the user came to you and said, "This are my requirements"?
I'm having a hard time hearing. Sorry.
So what is our recommendation if your requirements are to do more with SharePoint?
Yes. Would you say stay away from Teams?
Come see us after the talk, because I want to make sure we understand the scenario. I think we're missing something.
Sure.
Thanks. All right, let's go over here. And we've got 2 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many as we can.
So if I understand correctly, on PSTN calling features, you are using Skype for Business Online.
Can you stand closer to the mic, please?
In PSTN calling, you are using the Skype for Business Online PSTN calling feature. But how about in those countries where the PSTN calling feature for Skype for Business Online is not available? So where the only option is Cloud Connector Edition or via on-prem hybrid?
So Dan's saying voice on-prem SBC. So you're saying you're using PSTN calling, will it still work? Yeah, we'll let Dan answer that one. He's the meetings whisperer.
Where was the question, sir?
So.
Okay, no, I heard it, sorry.
Yeah.
So we've kind of had a bit of a sea change in our prioritization around hybrid for voice, where initially we were pushing CCE and trying to move and trying to get as many numbers in as many markets as we could for our cloud voice solution. We're still doing that, but we also recognize that whether it's a market reason or a local telco or just because there's going to be an on-prem voice SIP trunk coming in, and people just want to keep that. So what we're doing is going forward, we're actually certifying SBCs to connect directly to our cloud voice solution, bypassing CCE. CCE isn't going to be needed anymore in the future. So whether it's in a market where we either aren't, we will get to at some point, or for certain markets we can't get there, period, because of regulatory reasons. Or it's just because you have it and you want to use it, you'll be able to have a certified SBC connection to our cloud and keep your, bring your phone numbers up and everything. SIP trunking is still happening on-prem, but you can manage the voice through our cloud interface.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Unfortunately, I think we have time for one more question. We got 20 seconds. So.
We can stick around a little bit after.
Yeah, but we'll be over here in the corner when we're done.
If I have a SharePoint Online search application, are all of the files and conversations going to be natively searchable, or am I going to have to go in and configure those to be findable?
The files should be searchable because they're just files in SharePoint. We have separate search for all the conversations that you can get through.
And there's a third actually search for people as well.
Yep.
Okay.
It's all kind of integrated seamlessly, but under the covers, there's really the three entities.
So the short answer is yes. Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you all very much. We appreciate your time today and all the great questions.
All right, thank you.